Arcane Universe Chapter 31 The Antalya Plains was located in the eastern mountains of the Alvendale Empire. The entire plains belonged to the Antalya Prefecture, and the entire Antalya Prefecture belonged to the Counts of Antalya. Viscount Ferguson was a vassal of the Counts of Antalya. His territory was located in the eastern part of the Antalya Prefecture. Leo's father was a frontier knight conferred by Viscount Ferguson. His frontier territory was located in the eastern wilderness of Ferguson's territory. Further east of Pedro's frontier knight territory was the endless Eastern Mountain Range. The Eastern Mountain Range was also known as the East Coast Mountain Range. After passing through this enormous mountain range that spanned over 1,000 kilometers, one would reach the east coast of the Ceylon continent. This was the geographical knowledge that Leo learned in the Wizard Academy. When the three of them climbed up the mountain ridge, the darkness before dawn had already passed and the sky was slightly brighter. The three of them stood at the top of the mountain and saw a vast and boundless plain. This was the Antalya Plains. On this plain, within sight, there were a few castles and a town scattered about. The closest to the three of them was Eric's Frontier Knight's castle. It was a very simple and crude castle. Although it was called a castle, it was actually a simple and crude wall that surrounded a slightly bloated circular defensive tower. This 4-story stone defensive tower was Leo's home. The 4-story stone tower was about 15 to 16 meters tall and its diameter was about the same as its height. The first floor of the stone tower was the military hall. The main function of this hall was defense. The interior was divided into 2 levels. If an enemy wanted to enter, they would have to pass through a 20-meter-long narrow passageway between the inner and outer levels. Within this distance, every step an invader took would be met with a pike attack from the inner hall. After passing through the passageway and entering the first floor hall, there was a staircase that led to the second floor. The second floor was Leo's father's office. Of course, this was also the second line of defense of the stone castle. If an enemy occupied the first floor, then the defenders on the second floor would be able to pass through the atrium in the middle of the hall. They attacked all the positions on the first floor from above. The third and fourth floors were also separated into an inner and outer mezzanine. The inner mezzanine was the residence. The inner mezzanine on the third floor was the residence of Leo, his brother, and the maids. And the inner mezzanine on the fourth floor was the residence of Eric and Leo's mother. There were shooting holes in the mezzanine outside the third and fourth floors. The soldiers could also climb to the top of the defense tower through this mezzanine and use crossbows to assist the militia on the outer walls of the castle. In addition to a large portable ballista, there was also a combat platform that protruded out of the tower. The platform had a downward-facing shooting hole that could be used to attack enemies from above. The outer perimeter of the stone castle was a simple, square earthen wall. The earthen wall was built with 2 layers of wood, and the middle was filled with earth. In order to guard against the powerful gnolls and the tall ogres, the earthen wall was 6 meters tall and 2 meters thick. It was said that the wood used to build the orchid had been treated with magic potions to prevent it from rotting. Frontier Knight Eric's biggest wish was that one day, when he had money, he would use mud to rock to turn the mud wall outside the castle into a stone wall. There were 4 stone towers that protruded from the 4 corners of the earthen wall. These towers were about 3 to 4 meters in diameter and 7 to 8 meters in height. The stone castle and towers were built in the same way as Drow's stronghold underground. They were built with stone and clay, and finally, with the use of mud to stone, the stone castle and towers were turned into a single large block of stone. In the open space between the wall and the central stone castle, there were many houses made of wood and stone. These houses closer to the stone castle looked more decent, while those further away were much simpler. The decent houses were for the commoner knights and squires under Leo's father, as well as the blacksmiths and merchants. The outer perimeter was for the residents. There were about 70 households in the entire castle, about 360 people. Leo's father had 4 commoner knights and a dozen squires under him. Most of these people were companions he met when he was a mercenary. This castle used to be Leo's nightmare. It was dirty, crowded, and always filled with a lingering stench. The rooms in the castle were small and dark, always emitting a musty smell. The maids with their black mouths and strong halitosis always affected his appetite. The thing he hated the most was the annual long vacation of the Mage Academy, because he would have to return to this disgusting place during that time. But today, when Feng Chou saw this familiar yet strange castle again, tears came out of nowhere, and he couldn't wipe them away. Tasting the sorrow in his heart, Feng Chou helplessly found that when he received Liu's memories, it seemed that he had accepted some of his feelings. A large amount of farmland was opened up around the castle. According to Qiankun Pagoda's estimation, this farmland was about 7,000 mu. According to the expansion decree, as long as Liu's father continued to cultivate this farmland for 20 years, half of this farmland, plus the surrounding forest area that was twice the size of the farmland, would permanently belong to his family. His family would also receive a title that was commensurate with the area of the farmland. The other half of the farmland would become the reward of the Lord who issued the expansion decree. Liu knew that these years, his father had been working hard to open up new farmland, in order to fight for the family's lowest hereditary title of a knight. According to the aristocratic law of this world, a knight's territory had a minimum size of 3 square kilometers. In this 3 square kilometer territory, a third of the land had to be cultivated, which was 1,500 mu. Liu's father's territory had already reached this standard, but a knight was only a title for life, and the person who received the title had to obtain the professional title of knight in order to inherit the title of knight. To obtain the professional title of knight, there were 2 prerequisites. First, you had to be a warrior above level 5. Second, you had to receive horsemanship, tactics, and etiquette training from a recognized organization, usually referred to as a knight school or the Temple of Knights, and obtain the recognition of the organization. Obtaining a graduation certificate to obtain the professional title of knight. This title was usually bestowed by the Temple of Knights. If a descendant of a knight couldn't advance into a level 5 warrior, this wasn't impossible, although warrior was the easiest profession to enter. But the proportion of warriors who could advance beyond level 5 was still only 1 in 10. Then this descendant of a knight would lose the title of knight, and thus lose their aristocratic status, becoming a squire between a commoner and a noble. In the eyes of the commoners in the countryside, squires were masters, but in the eyes of the real aristocrats and the rich in the city, squires were synonymous with country bumpkins. The lowest hereditary title was knight. This title used to be called baron, and was regarded as a quasi-aristocrat, but now, the upper class basically recognized this title as an official aristocrat, and the title was changed to knight. Knight was a purely aristocratic title, and it had nothing to do with strength. The minimum standard of a knight's territory was 10 square kilometers, and there had to be 5,000 mu of arable land in the territory. If a frontier knight wanted to obtain the title of knight, he had to work hard to open up more than 10,000 mu of arable land, so that after paying the lord half of the arable land, there would still be enough arable land left to obtain the title of knight. In these years, Knight Eric gave up on professional practice, gave up the comfortable life of a noble, and put all of his energy and money into the construction of the territory. Seeing that his dream was getting closer and closer, report select text and click report to let us know about any bad translation. Arcane Universe Chapter 32 Leo's father, the Knight of Eric, was the second son of a baron. His territory was built with the help of his father, the former Baron Amberite. It was also his father who helped him choose the location for his territory. It was a very good territory. This territory was close to the mountain range, and there were 2 small rivers flowing out of the mountains. These 2 small rivers, which were more than 10 kilometers apart, left the valley and converged about 10 kilometers away from the foot of the mountain, forming a larger river. The Knight of Eric called this converging river the Pedro River because he planned to name his title Pedro in the future. In other words, if he received the title of a knight in the future, his title would be Sir Pedro, and the name of his territory would be Sir Pedro. Eric's castle was located at the intersection of the 2 rivers. On the river, more than 10 water wheels were slowly rotating. The river water was raised to an elevated wooden canal. Then, through these wooden canals, the water was diverted to the farmland. The whole territory looked like a rich farmland. Leo's high expenses in the Mage Academy came from this territory that his father painstakingly managed. Looking at this remote territory that Leo used to look down on, Feng Chou's eyes were filled with more and more tears. More than 20 kilometers downstream of the Pedro River, there was a slightly larger castle. It was the castle of an old knight family in the territory of Viscount Ferguson. Further downstream, at the intersection of the three rivers, a town could be vaguely seen. In the town, the castle and the temple were the most conspicuous. At the other two tributaries where the three rivers converged, a few castles could be faintly seen. If the endless plains and forests at the foot of the mountain were an ocean, then the human castles and towns were islands of varying sizes in this ocean. Feng Chou looked at the castle at the foot of the mountain and couldn't help but wipe his tears. This made Simon and Anru feel a little strange. They stopped and looked back at him. Feng Chou fiercely wiped away his tears and said to Simon, "Simon, I have good news for you." Simon frowned at him. Feng Chou then said to Anrui, "This good news involves a little secret of ours. Could you please leave us for a while?" Without another word, Anrui walked down the mountain and only stopped when he was dozens of meters away. Feng Chou then said to Simon, "The good news is that I lied to you in the dungeon. I'm not the son of Viscount Fegisac. I'm actually the son of a frontier knight. My name is Leo Stuart Amberite." Simon took a few steps towards Feng Chou with a dangerous glint in his eyes. He put one hand on the hilt of the sword at his waist and asked, "So?" Feng Chou chuckled and pointed at the castle at the foot of the mountain. "Do you see that? This rich territory under your feet belongs to me. According to the laws of nobility, the nearby mountains also belong to me." Simon frowned when he heard this. He looked at the castle at the foot of the mountain and then looked at the mountain they had just escaped from. He asked thoughtfully, "You're saying that you're the lord of this place?" Feng Chou said, "That's right." Feng Chou pointed at the mountain they had just escaped from and said, "That passage to the subterranean world is like a treasury." He then pointed at himself. "And I am the key to opening this treasury." "Simon, you're from the L Chamber of Commerce. I heard that you specialize in doing business with the Grey Dwarves. I think that the ones who colluded with Dro and killed my family shouldn't be you. Your Chamber of Commerce is powerful enough to obtain and protect this key of mine, isn't it?" Simon licked his lips and said, "You're right. Our L Chamber of Commerce is the strongest chamber of commerce in Antalya County. This passage will be a huge fortune. Only our L Chamber of Commerce can protect you." Feng Chou smiled. "And you will be the key to opening this fortune for your Chamber of Commerce. Look, are you satisfied with my compensation?" Simon let go of the hilt and rubbed his hands. He couldn't help but smile. "Satisfied. Very satisfied," Feng Chou said. "Then what are we waiting for?" Simon used his lousy aristocratic etiquette to make a gesture of "Your Excellency, please." Feng Chou smiled and walked down the mountain. Simon followed behind him. Feng Chou's current emotions, under the influence of Leo's feelings, were somewhat agitated. However, he didn't reveal his identity on impulse, but after a long period of careful consideration, he had been trapped underground for so long. Naturally, he often thought about what he should do if he could escape from underground. According to Qiankun Pagoda's opinion, because of the transmigration, because of the deep changes in the laws of the two worlds, many of the preparations he had made in his previous life had gone to waste. If he could escape, the most important thing he should do was to study the laws of this world and find a way to restore the magic of his previous life, or even a way to return to Earth. According to Leo's memories, to study the laws of this world, becoming a mage was the only choice. This was because in this world, mages were professionals who studied the laws of this world. To become a mage was not a simple matter. First, you had to be born with 15 points of intelligence to have the possibility of becoming an official mage. What kind of concept was 15 points of intelligence? According to Qiankun Pagoda's calculations, it was roughly equivalent to an IQ of 130. Secondly, you had to have enough money. In the process of becoming a mage, regardless of whether it was the cost of tuition, magic knowledge, magic materials, or magic experiments, every single one of them was astronomical to a commoner. Leo's father's fief was rather well managed. He lived frugally, earning him a net income of 10,000 crowns every year. This was even higher than the annual income of some of the smaller noble families. Crowns were the standard currency of the Avendal Empire, just like the pound sterling, franc, and dollar on Earth. Most of the countries in this world were the same as the 18th century Europe on Earth. They used gold and silver as the standard currency. The government generally stipulated that the ratio of gold and silver was 1:20. Crowns were the standard unit of silver in the Avendal Empire. This silver coin weighed a little more than 20 grams. It was not small and looked slightly smaller than China's silver dollar during the Republic of China. It was 95% silver. The purchasing power of 1 crown, according to Leo's memories and Qiankun Pagoda's estimations, was roughly equivalent to 100 RMB on Earth. Leo spent 3,000 crowns every year in the Mage Academy, which was roughly equivalent to 300,000 RMB. This amount of tuition took up a third of his father's income. The remaining 6,000 crowns not only had to be used to continue the development of the fief, but also to cover the expenses of his entire family. In order to support Leo's studies in the Mage Academy, his father was almost unable to maintain the image of a noble family. With such a high cost, it was already difficult for a noble family to support a low-ranked mage, let alone a commoner. There was only one way for a commoner to become a mage. Report, select text and click report to let us know about any bad translation. Arcane Universe Chapter 33. If a commoner wanted to become a mage, they would have to be a genius. The mages in this world had a way to test one's magical talent. Generally speaking, a person's mental strength was directly proportional to their intelligence. If a person had not received meditation training, then as long as the strength of their mental strength was known, their intelligence could be estimated. The mental state of a person who had received meditation training was very different from that of a person who had not received meditation training. It was very easy to distinguish. The mages in this world used these two principles to design a magic item to test the talent of a commoner, so that they could identify the rare group of people with magical talent. The Antalya Mage Academy would organize a group of people every year to test the magical talent of every 14-year-old youth in the territory for free. Of course, there were some exceptions in this world where mental strength and intelligence did not match, but these exceptions were only 1 or 2 out of hundreds of thousands of people, so the accuracy of the test was very low. Moreover, even if they accidentally recruited an apprentice with high mental strength but mismatched intelligence, it was not a big deal. Even if such an apprentice could not become a mage, it would be easier to train them to become a magic vanguard or a magic archer. If a commoner was tested to have 20 points of intelligence, he would immediately be sent to the Mage Academy. He only needed to sign a contract with the Mage Academy or a noble, and he would have the opportunity to learn magic for free. A genius with 20 points of intelligence would become an official mage without a doubt. As long as you worked hard enough, becoming an intermediate mage was not impossible. As long as one could become an official mage, even if it was just selling the spell slots every day, it would be easy to pay off the debt of learning magic. It was said that there were only a few geniuses with 20 points of intelligence in this world in 1,000 people. Feng Chou was not a genius, so of course he would not have the opportunity to learn arcane spells for free. In fact, if he lost Leo's status as a quasi-noble, it would be extremely difficult for Feng Chou to enter the Mage Academy. The nobles, churches, and mages guilds in this world were very cautious when it came to cultivating mages. An unregistered citizen with no background, even if his intelligence was up to standard, would have a hard time passing the entrance test of the Mage Academy. Even a commoner, or a genius, would have to be guaranteed by a noble, Mage Academy, or guild to enter a Mage Academy, let alone an unregistered citizen. As for the commoners who were vouched for, after they became mages, they would have to work for a certain number of years in a noble, mage school, or guild to repay the debt. Feng Chou roughly guessed the reason behind Leo's family's mishap after learning from Simon what a passageway to the underground world meant and what kind of value it had. It was nothing more than the crime of possessing a jade ring. According to Simon, because of the existence of the trade route to the underground world, Shakil City could receive millions of crowns in tax every year. It was a very important source of income for Grand Duke Vita. Even if the passage in Leo's father's territory wasn't as good as Shaquille's, it could still bring in millions of crowns every year. This income was enough to make great nobles like the Counts of Antalya jealous. It was definitely not something a frontier knight could keep. Ever since he figured out the possible reasons behind the accident of Leo's family, Feng Chou had been considering whether or not he could take advantage of Leo's identity and the invaluable underground world channel to fish in troubled waters. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that it was possible. With this idea in mind, he began to deliberately ask Simon about the merchant guild he worked for. The merchant guild Simon worked for was called the L Chamber of Commerce. It was a very famous local merchant guild in Antalya County. This merchant guild had the backing of the Counts of Antalya's family, and monopolized most of Antalya's food, wood, and mineral exports. They were quite powerful. From Simon, Feng Chou knew that the L Chamber of Commerce also did business with the underground world. Within the borders of Antalya County, there wasn't originally a path to the underground world. The L Chamber of Commerce could only enter the underground world through Shaquille City in the Duchy of Vita. The L Chamber of Commerce's trading partners were mainly the few remote cities of the Grey Dwarves below Antalya, because the Grey Dwarves and the Drow Elves had a hostile relationship. Generally speaking, the merchant guilds that traded with the Grey Dwarves would rarely establish relations with the Drow Elves. This was because doing so would easily offend both sides. If Simon wasn't lying, then the powerful L Chamber of Commerce shouldn't have anything to do with the Drow Elves. If it didn't have anything to do with the Drow Elves, then it was unlikely that it was the murderer of his father. Of course, what really made Feng Chou make up his mind wasn't Simon's words, but his own judgment. First of all, Feng Chou knew that the biggest shareholder behind the L Chamber of Commerce was the Antalya family. This was no secret in Antalya. The second reason was the family flag with the golden dragon pattern that was currently floating above his father's castle. That flag represented Leo's uncle, the knight Eric's brother, and the current Baron Amberite. In other words, this frontier knight territory had actually fallen into the hands of Baron Amberite. If the Antalya family wanted to obtain this underground passage, then making a deal with Eric, a frontier knight, would be much easier and more cost-effective than making a deal with the powerful Baron Amberite, who had the backing of the Stewart family. This was something that was easy to understand, and he believed that the Counts of Antalya wouldn't be so stupid as to not think of this point. Therefore, Feng Chou speculated that the L Chamber of Commerce, which had the backing of the Antalya family, was most likely not the mastermind behind the murder of Leo's family. After negotiating with Simon, Feng Chou led the two of them down the mountain. As they descended the mountain, the sky gradually brightened. Feng Chou and Simon had adapted to the strong light during this period of time. Although it was still a little uncomfortable, it was bearable. However, Anru, who had lived in the underground city since she was young and had some Drow blood in her, could not adapt to the strong light after daybreak. However, this woman was already prepared. She took out a pair of dark-colored goggles from her pocket and put them on. As Drow elves had lived underground for generations, their eyes were completely unable to adapt to the strong light on the surface. However, Drow sometimes needed to go to the surface to move around. In order to avoid being blinded by the strong light on the surface, Drow had to wear these goggles every time he went to the surface. The location that Feng Chou chose to leave the mountain was in the forest at the edge of the knight's territory after descending the mountain. Because of Knight Eric's desperate sweeping over the past few years, the forest near the lordship of Pedro was relatively clean. After bypassing Knight Eric's territory at the edge of the forest, they walked on the only road that led to the outside world. This was originally a simple dirt road. Once it rained, it would become muddy. However, when Feng Chou walked on this road again, he found that this road had been renovated. Not only was this road widened compared to before, drainage ditches were arranged on both sides, and the road was covered with a layer of sand and stones. It seemed that Leo's uncle had made sufficient preparations for the opening of the underground passage. Report. Select text and click report to let us know about any bad translation. Arcane Universe Chapter 34. Walking on this quiet forest road, Feng Chou finally had a chance to sort out the gains he had just gained in the underground fortress battlefield. First of all, the power of the soul. He took the risk of attaching Qiankun Pagoda to the tiger cub that was used as bait, hoping to fish in troubled water and absorb some power of the soul. It turned out that his risk was worth it. Qiankun Pagoda told him that in that battle, the Reincarnation Mirror had absorbed a total of 7,663 standard units of the power of the soul, which was enough to open the highest time acceleration in the universe in the tower for more than 2 years. Secondly, he took the opportunity to collect a lot of high-quality weapons and armors left by Dro when Simon and others did not pay attention to him. In order to collect the armors, Feng Chou even collected dozens of corpses of Drows priests and high-ranking warriors. The best equipment on the battlefield certainly belonged to the 3 priests, followed by more than a dozen high-ranking warriors. The 2 spider elves' equipment were also high-level alchemy items. Next, more than 30 middle-ranking priests' equipment were also good. Of course, the equipment of the 3 priests belonged to Simon and Anru. The 2 also took a lot of weapons from the hands of the spider elves and high-ranking warriors of Dro. The weapons were light and easy to take away. Feng Chou used Qiankun Pagoda to collect things. As long as he put his hand on it, Qiankun Pagoda could put the items into the universe in the tower according to his will. It was very fast. He took the opportunity when Simon and others were concentrating on collecting high-ranking equipment, and put some high-ranking warriors, middle-ranking priests, and their corpses into the universe in the tower. The 2 spider elves did not dare to move because it was too obvious. At first, Feng Chou did not pay attention to the simple equipment left by the Tiger Man, but Qiankun Pagoda reminded him that some of the bone weapons, shields, and simple metal weapons and shields left by the Tiger Man seemed to have a special energy reaction. Feng Chou thought that since he had a lot of space, it would be a waste if he didn't take it. So, he collected a lot of the simple equipment left behind by the high-level Tigerman. When they finally left, Simon and Anru were both carrying large bags. Only Feng Chou was clean and nimble. He only took a clean set of clothes and an intact set of armor from Dro and put them on. He also picked up 2 high-level warriors' scimitars and hung them on his waist. Simon thought that Feng Chou, who was born a noble, would not be interested in these blood-stained equipment, so he did not say much. In fact, Feng Chou's harvest was much more than theirs. According to Qiankun Pagoda's calculations, he had collected more than 70 Drows' heavy scimitars, more than 20 sets of medium armors, and more than 10 sets of light armors. The so-called medium armor was a custom-made plate armor with a helmet and body armor. The limbs were chainmail, which could protect the head and body and ensure the flexibility of the limbs. Dro generally did not use a full body plate heavy armor. Light armor was a kind of armor that had 2 layers of leather armor that had been treated with alchemy and embedded with metal plates. This kind of armor's defensive power wasn't weak, and when moving, it wouldn't make a sound like a medium armor. In order to make it easier to escape, Feng Chou and the other 2 all chose to wear light armor. In addition to these Drows' equipment, Feng Chou also collected a lot of bones and crude metal equipment used by the Tigerman. At that time, Feng Chou had only listened to Qiankun Pagoda's suggestion and did it in passing. Now that he thought about it, these things should be extraordinary. Almost all the dead Drows were smashed to death by heavy weapons. With the powerful strength of the Tigerman's advanced barbarian warriors, if it were ordinary bones, they would have been smashed to pieces by the metal armor. But these bone weapons were all intact. Some of the bone shields were cut by the Drows' heavy scimitars, but even the marks were very vague. The metal weapons in the Tigerman's hands were also very crude. It gave the impression that they were made by randomly digging a hole in the mud. It was just that they had a convenient shape and could be used as a hammer. Some of the metal shields were also like that. It was as if they had randomly dug a shallow hole and poured a metal solution into it to cast a flat metal block. These metals didn't look like they were made of iron. They looked dark, but their reflections were mixed with dense golden light spots. Although the appearance was ugly, these metals were definitely not ordinary. Because of the fierce battle, there were no marks on the surface of these metal weapons. The heavy scimitars in Drow's hands were all made of high-grade black steel. and some were even made of secondary arcane steel. With the addition of alchemy processing, their hardness and sharpness were so high that ordinary steel was like wood in front of steel. The fact that they could not leave a mark on these metals showed that these metals were not ordinary. The value of the equipment left by the Tigerman was not easy to judge, but the value of Drow's equipment was definitely not low. Simon, as a level 6 warrior and level 3 rogue, was already considered an elite among human warriors. When he saw these equipment, his eyes almost shone. When he left, he looked at the equipment all over the ground. His face was twisted, and he felt like his heart was bleeding. After calculating the income, Feng Chou's mood, which had been extremely bad after seeing Liu's father's territory, gradually improved. Feng Chou did not find it difficult to understand why his mood was affected by Liu's memory. A person's personality itself was shaped by character and memory. Accepting the memory naturally meant accepting part of the other person's personality. The three of them followed the road to the knight's territory. This territory belonged to Sir Cecil's family. This was an old family of knights. After several generations of development, the size of Sir Cecil's territory had far exceeded the lower limit of a knight's territory. According to Qiankun Pagoda's calculations, this territory had about 30,000 mu of arable land. Among the knights, it was considered to be above average in size. After the Pedro River entered the Cecil family's territory, it would be called the Cecil River. The Cecil family took advantage of the difference in topography in the territory. In the upper reaches of the Cecil River, they built a simple dam and diverted the raised river water into several channels. Taking advantage of the topography, they cleverly built a set of irrigation system. This allowed more than half of the arable land in the territory to be fully irrigated. The Cecil family's castle was also much larger than Leo's father's castle. Leo's father's castle walls were less than 100 meters long, but the Cecil castle walls were almost 300 meters long. There were nearly 300 families living inside, with a population of more than 1,000. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was a small town. The town's walls were the stone walls that Leo's father dreamed of. At the center of the town was a real castle, not the simple one in Leo's father's territory that looked like a defensive tower. It was a square-shaped stone castle with sides of about 30 meters and a height of about 30 meters. At the four corners of the castle were four small square towers that protruded out of the castle walls. They could provide long-range support from the sides of the castle walls. The top of the four small square towers was higher than the entire castle and was the highest point of the town. There were four large ballistae placed there that could provide powerful firepower support to the town's outer walls. The construction cost of such a standard small castle was about 100,000 crowns. Only a knight's family like the Cecil family could afford it. Report. Select text and click report to let us know about any bad translation. Arcane Universe Chapter 35. In order to avoid unnecessary complications, Feng Chou and the other two didn't choose to pass through the Cecil family's territory. Instead, they planned to go around the edge of the forest. The three walked along the edge of the Cecil family's farmland for a while before they heard the sounds of battle coming from the depths of the forest. Judging from the sound, it wasn't too far from them. The three exchanged glances and moved towards the direction of the sound. They followed the sound and climbed up a hill. Below the hill, in the valley, several humans were fighting with a group of strange creatures. These creatures were only half the height of a human. Their heads were a bit like a lizard's, while their torso and arms were similar to a human's. However, their claws were dry and sharp. Their legs were like the hind legs of a velociraptor, but in proportion to their bodies, they were much longer and larger. They easily supported their upright bodies. Below their legs were a pair of strong and sharp claws, and behind them was a long lizard tail. Although he wanted to call these creatures lizards, Leo's memories told Feng Chou that they were called kobolds. As for why they had such a strange name, it was easy to understand by hearing their barks. In the chaotic battlefield, woof, woof, the kobolds were fighting a small group of 5 human mercenaries. Unlike Feng Chou's imagination of a mercenary team with all kinds of warriors, mages, and priests, this team only had 2 professions: warriors and rogues. Among the 5 people, there were 4 warriors and 1 rogue. Among the 4 warriors, Two of them were holding shields in the front, charging left and right amidst the group of short and agile kobolds. The other two warriors were 20 meters behind them, holding bows and arrows. Arrows were knocked on the bowstring, but they didn't pull the bowstring to shoot. The rogue wandered around the two shield-holding warriors, constantly giving them a chance to rescue them. Leo's memories told Feng Chou that this kind of mercenary group was the norm. Most of the noble mages hid in their ivory towers and immersed themselves in magic research. Even if they left school, most of them worked in the city's alchemy factories or were hired by the nobles as guests. They would never risk their lives in the mud. Holy priests should be in the temple guiding the gods' flock. Even if they weren't crowded, they should be in the noble's castle receiving the worship of the villagers. They would never use the god's gift to earn a low commission. That would only cause them to be abandoned by the god. Nature professions such as rangers and druids were very rare in the human kingdoms. Therefore, warriors and rogues were the majority of mercenaries. The battlefield was not far from the hillside, just within the scanning range of Qiankun Pagoda. Qiankun Pagoda's scan results quickly arrived. The profession levels of the mercenaries surprised Feng Chou greatly. In Feng Chou's impression, kobolds were small monsters that could even kill ordinary people. However, this group of kobolds moved as if they were flying, suddenly advancing and retreating. They actually made a level 5 warrior, a level 4 warrior, and a level 4 rogue flustered. Unknown creature. Constitution. 9 strength. 8 dexterity. 15 mental strength. 8 perception. 9 intelligence. 9 physical assessment. Healthy mental assessment. Full special energy reaction. None. Unknown creature. Constitution. 8 strength. 7 dexterity. 14 mental strength. 21 perception. 11 intelligence. 12 physical assessment. Healthy mental assessment. Full special energy reaction. Unknown. Qiankun Pagoda opened 2 screens in Feng Chou's vision at the same time. In other words, he thought that there were 2 different types of kobolds. At the same time, Qiankun Pagoda marked the 2 kobolds at the back with a red glimmer in Feng Chou's vision. Before Feng Chou could carefully distinguish the difference between the 2 types of kobolds, the 2 kobolds marked by Qiankun Pagoda had already shown that they were different. One of them threw away the rusty short sword in his hand, and the other threw away the short spear in his hand. They raised their claws and aimed at the 2 warriors who were rushing left and right in the group of kobolds. 2 faint silver streamers shot out from their claws and hit the 2 warriors like lightning. Fortunately, the 2 warriors reacted very quickly. When they noticed that the 2 kobolds had begun to cast spells, they had already moved their shields and were ready to meet the attack. These 2 streamers didn't seem to be very strong, but they had a shocking effect. Although the 2 warriors blocked the streamers with their shields, they were still knocked back by the huge force. The level 5 warrior was better off. He was only knocked back a few steps, but the level 4 warrior was simply knocked back 2 or 3 meters and sat on the ground. If it weren't for the support of the rogues next to him, he would have been killed by the 2 kobolds with short spears. At this time, Feng Chou understood why the 2 warriors were holding their bows and arrows in the back, neither helping nor shooting. It turned out that they were waiting for the warlocks among the kobolds to make a move. Kobolds were said to have an extremely thin dragon bloodline, so it was easier for them to produce a dragon warlock. Although their casting level was not high, the spellcasters in this world were not the spellcasters in the game. There was no balance to speak of. Just like the spell that the 2 kobolds had just released, it was actually only a level 1 spell, Magic Missile. The 2 kobolds' casting level was definitely not higher than level 2, but its power could pose a huge threat to a level 5 warrior. If the 2 magic missiles just now had not been blocked by the shield and directly hit the warrior's body, even if they were wearing steel armor, they would not have been able to avoid bone fractures and serious injuries. However, although the spellcasters in this world were magical, their bodies were only mortal. The 2 archers who had been waiting for an opportunity had already shot the arrows that had already been knocked on their bowstrings when the 2 kobold warlocks had just started to cast spells. These 2 archers were a level 3 warrior and a level 4 warrior. The level 3 warrior's archery was more accurate, and the level 4 warrior's arrows were more powerful. The level 3 warrior shot through the neck of the kobold warlock on the left, and the level 4 warrior shot through the chest of the kobold warlock on the right. After the two warlocks were killed, the kobold's morale immediately collapsed, and they fled in all directions. These ordinary kobolds were only a little more than half the height of an ordinary human, and their weight was probably only a quarter of a human's, but their strength and vitality were not much different from an ordinary adult's, and their agility was comparable to a level 1 rogue's. When these small and agile creatures escaped, the average person would be left in the dust. Although the 5 mercenaries were strong, they could only chase after 1 kobold each and could only give up. Seeing that the battle was over, Simon patted Feng Chou's shoulder and motioned for him to retreat. The 3 retreated behind a bush and hid. After the mercenaries collected their spoils of war and left the forest with a few kobold heads, they walked out of the forest amidst a string of arrogant laughter. Report. Select text and click report to let us know about any bad translation. Arcane Universe Chapter 36. Feng Chou looked at the direction the mercenaries had left in and muttered to himself, "It's just some kobolds. Why would the lord of this place hire mercenaries to clean them up?" Simon looked at him strangely and asked, "What else could it be?" Feng Chou said, "My father would never hire mercenaries to do such things. He would always bring his knights and squires to clean them up himself." Simon said, "That's because your father was a frontier knight and he himself was strong. These true nobles who rested on the glory of their ancestors would never pick up their own swords. To them, it's too dangerous and too rude to wield their own swords. Training knights and soldiers is too troublesome, and the pension is too expensive. Hiring mercenaries to clean up the wild creatures around their territory is the simplest and most convenient method. In any case, mercenaries are paid to do things, and their deaths have nothing to do with them." He pointed in the direction of the territory and said, "A territory like this needs to spend at least a few kilograms of gold every year to hire mercenaries to clean up the wild creatures around the territory and maintain the safety of the territory. Otherwise, it won't be long before the farmers in the castle won't be able to come out and farm." Thinking about how Knight Eric had to bring his knights and squires to clean up the forest around the territory every few days, and how he had to bring back injured Knight Eric almost every month, and then thinking about how Leo had spent extravagantly at the Mage Academy in Antalya, Feng Chou didn't know why, but he felt uncomfortable in his heart. Feng Chou tasted the feelings in his heart and became more and more certain of his conjecture. Not only did he accept Leo's memories, but he also integrated his feelings and personality. He could feel that as he digested Leo's memories, the integration of his feelings and personality became deeper and deeper, and the influence on him became greater and greater. The rest of the journey was relatively peaceful. They went around Cecil's territory and returned to the main road. Following the sandy road that was accompanied by the river, they walked all the way to the east. After walking for about 20 kilometers, they came across another territory. This territory was larger than Sir Cecil's, and was close to the size of Baron's territory. According to the laws of nobility, the minimum size of a baron's territory was 100 square kilometers and 50,000 mu of farmland. The size of this territory was close to 40,000 mu of farmland. This was a manor that directly belonged to Viscount Ferguson's family. According to Leo's memory, Feng Chou felt that the agricultural technology of this world should be around the level of the European Renaissance. However, due to the existence of alchemy, the agricultural output of this world was much higher than that of the Renaissance. Due to the influence of human activities and farming technology, there was a limit to the amount of arable land a castle or town could control. Generally speaking, a castle controlling a standard baron's domain, 50,000 mu of arable land, was already the upper limit. Therefore, for nobles above the rank of baron, their territories were mostly composed of multiple territories. Apart from controlling the town of Forgesac, Viscount Forgesac also controlled the nearby 3 knight domains and 1 baron domain. It was said that these 4 territories had more than 200,000 mu of arable land. Apart from these direct territories, the Forgesac family also owned 70 to 80,000 mu of land in the outskirts of their territory, in a few remote knights or gentlemen's domains. These land rights were all profits obtained from the successive generations of viscounts who had issued development orders. It was precisely these lands and manors that supported the prosperity of Forgesac town. Compared to the knight's domain from before, this manor called Bubical Manor was much larger and more imposing. The farmland outside the city was much more orderly. Here, another river of similar size converged with the Cecil River to form the even larger Bubical Allen River. The irrigation facilities in this domain were much more comprehensive, covering almost all the arable land. After bypassing this manor, they weren't far from Forgesac town. They walked through the forest for less than 10 kilometers before their eyes suddenly opened up, arriving at the edge of a large farmland area. The town of Forgesac was surrounded by a large area of farmland. Forgesac town was located a little downstream from the confluence of the three rivers. Feng Chou had discovered that many territories here would choose to be located at the confluence of the rivers when they were observing from the top of the mountain. This was because in order to open up the land, one needed a water source. The more abundant the water source, the better. The wilderness was vast and there were many choices. Naturally, one had to choose the best place. In addition to providing water, rivers could also provide the power source for water wheels. Water wheels were an important part of the irrigation system in this age. The more rivers there were, the greater the area of land that the irrigation system could reach. One more tributary could increase the area of high-quality arable land controlled by a castle by more than 1/3. Forgesac town was the center of Viscount Fegesac's domain, so it was natural to choose the best place. Of the three rivers that converged in Forgesac town, the one that came from Leo's father's domain wasn't the main stream. Instead, it was the smallest tributary. Forgesac's tributaries came from the northeast, the north, and the east where Leo's father's domain was located. The river that came from the north was called the Amberite River, while the one that came from the northeast was called the Elvis River. Feng Chou's uncle, Baron Amberite's domain, was located upstream of the Amberite River. Upstream of the Elvis River was another domain controlled by the Forgesac family, the Elvis domain. After the three rivers converged, the name became the Forgesac River. It continued flowing southwest until it reached Antalya City, where it became one of the tributaries that merged into the Antalya River. Of the three rivers, the Elvis River that came from the northeast had the most flow. Forgesac town was located not far downstream of the confluence of the Amberite River and the Elvis River. There was a small pier not far from the south gate of Forgesac City. When the three rivers converged, the amount of water was enough for boats to sail. Although it was only a small boat that could carry more than 10 tons, it allowed the city to trade goods with the outside world to increase exponentially. Simon asked Feng Chou and Anru to wait for him in the forest by the road. He had to enter the city first to contact the people from the L Chamber of Commerce. Otherwise, they would be in trouble when they entered the city with a large number of weapons and armor. Anru hesitated for a moment and said, "Thank you very much, my friends, but I think it's time for me to leave." Simon knew that Anru still did not trust him, so he did not stop him. He smiled and said, "May luck always be with you, my friend. Goodbye." Anru smiled and turned to walk into the depths of the forest. Simon looked at Anru's back and thought for a moment. Then he said to Feng Chou, "Follow me." Feng Chou followed Simon through a field and came to the bank of the Allen River. Simon squatted by the river and began to shave. As he shaved, he said, "I think we should wash up before going to town. Otherwise, we will be mistaken for Jacquelines." Feng Chou agreed. Report, select text and click report to let us know about any bad translation. Arcane Universe Chapter 37. Feng Chou and Simon had stayed in the underground world for almost half a year, not to mention their hair and beards. They had not even washed their faces. Although Feng Chou could not see himself, Simon's appearance was not much better than that of a barbarian. His disgusting hair and beards covered half of his face. The parts of his face that were not covered were covered in dirt and pitch black. The inlaid leather armor on his body looked decent, but his hands that were exposed were as black as chicken claws. Feng Chou squatted down and looked at his own reflection in the water. He seemed to be a little stronger than Simon, because he did not have a beard. His body was only 17 years old, not yet at the age of having a beard, but it was not much different. Because his hair was also disgustingly tied together, it was almost impossible to see the originally beautiful golden red color. His face was also pitch black, and his hands were like chicken claws. The two squatted by the river and carefully washed themselves. They spent half a day and finally made themselves look like normal people. After cleaning themselves up, the two of them crossed a stone bridge, passed through a field of farmland, and arrived at the north gate of Ferguson town. However, Simon didn't plan on entering the town. He brought Feng Chou from the north of the town, and along the small path in the fields outside the town walls, they made a detour to the south, and arrived at the pier outside the town's south gate. There was a hotel on the road from the dock to the town's south gate. In front of the hotel was a courtyard surrounded by wooden fences, and there were a few carriages parked in the courtyard. The main building of the hotel was a small 3-story building with a courtyard behind it. Behind the courtyard was a row of warehouses. Simon brought Feng Chou into the hotel. On the first floor of the hotel's main building, there was a tavern with a large area. There were many guests sitting inside. Most of the guests here wore all kinds of armor and carried all kinds of weapons, but these people were not necessarily mercenaries. Some of them were merchants, and some were workers of trade caravans. This world was so dangerous that even serfs would carry axes and spears when they went out to work. In this world, those who dared to cross the wilderness to do business were not weak. Some of the intelligent races in the wilderness especially liked to ambush passing caravans on both sides of the road, such as the Nulls. Many of the members of the caravan were retired mercenaries who had changed their profession. Many of the mercenaries also did small businesses on the side. For example, when they received a mission to a remote territory, they would escort a cart of goods over. After entering the tavern, Simon knocked on the bar counter. "Hey, I need a guest room." The manager at the bar stared at the two of them for a moment and asked Simon to pay the deposit first. Although the two of them had washed up by the river, their appearance was still very suspicious. Seeing Simon's troubled expression, the tavern owner immediately shook his head like a rattle drum. Simon could only remove a scimitar from his waist and hand it to the shopkeeper as collateral. Only then did he get the key to a guest room on the second floor. After entering the guest room, he handed the bag containing his weapon to Feng Chou and asked him to wait for him there. After Simon left, Feng Chou asked for another room on the third floor of the hotel. This small hotel building was the tallest building near the pier. Standing in front of the window on the third floor, the view was very wide. Feng Chou watched Simon walk into the south gate of the town. He looked at the town not far away and couldn't help but fall into his memories. This town was neither big nor small. It was surrounded by a square wall less than 2 kilometers long. The wall was more than 6 meters high, and every 40 meters on the wall, there was a semicircular defense tower. There were 4 large defense towers at the 4 corners of the wall. Looking past the wall, he couldn't see the ordinary buildings in the town, but he could see a few particularly tall buildings. The most conspicuous of them was, of course, the castle in the middle of the town. It was different from the castles that Feng Chou had seen along the way, which only considered defensive effects. This castle was more in line with Feng Chou's imagination of a castle. This castle was generally divided into 2 floors. The lower floor was the defensive layer, and this floor was similar to an ordinary castle. It was sturdy, thick, and had narrow windows. But on the upper floor of the castle, it was completely different. Above the defensive layer of the castle, there were 2 more Gothic buildings. On these 2 floors, there were snow-white walls with many wide and bright windows. The windows were inlaid with beautiful and expensive alchemy glass, which was different from the darkness of an ordinary castle. These 2 floors were a bit smaller than the military layer below, and the roof of the military layer was built into a garden-like balcony. Some flowers and ivy plants were planted, dyeing the whole building green. Leo had been to this balcony before. From there, one could have a bird's-eye view of the whole town, and even see the nearby manors. The view was very open, making one feel relaxed and happy. The top floor of the Gothic building was a beautiful arched spire. On the spire, there was a statue of Yang Jian on a horse. That was the statue of the god of nobles and knights. It clearly expressed the devout faith of the owner of this castle. Leo's father was a vassal of Viscount Fergusac. When he was 11 years old, he went to the castle as the vassal's heir and swore allegiance to the Viscount's heir. When he stepped on the balcony for the first time and looked over the whole plain, he swore to himself that one day, he would own a castle like this. After that, Leo received knight training in the knight school in this town until he was 14 years old, when he was discovered to be a mage. It could be said that Leo's familiarity with this town surpassed that of his father's frontier knight domain. The second tallest building in the town was a majestic shrine. That was the shrine of the god of nobles and knights. Heller. Alvendal was a magic empire. The big cities in this country were often the domain of the god of arcane magic, Bakabu, or the god of knowledge and alchemy, Savan. However, the light of arcane magic couldn't shine on every inch of land in the empire. In some remote areas, the power of magic was often lacking. At this time, the nobles needed the power of knights to protect their domain. Therefore, these areas were the domain of the god of nobles and knights. Leo's father was a follower of this noble god. When he was young, Leo often went to this god's shrine to pray. However, after he entered the Mage Academy, he changed his faith and became a follower of Bakabu. Beside the shrine of the god of nobles and knights was a knight school. All the children of the nobles, gentlemen, and commoners in the Viscount's domain were accepted for knight training. The tuition was quite high, but compared to the Mage Academy, it was much more convenient. The yearly cost of the knight school was about 500 crowns. Apart from basic martial arts training, knight training also included horsemanship training, tactical training, and etiquette training. Horsemanship training included ordinary horsemanship training, lance combat training, horsemanship training, tactical training, command of troops below the size of a platoon, training of soldiers, organization of logistics, and so on. Generally speaking, a knight who graduated from a knight school would be qualified to be a mid-level or low-level officer. Etiquette training included simple heraldry and noble social etiquette. Report. Select text and click report to let us know about any bad translation. Arcane Universe Chapter 38. Leo's talent as a warrior was average, and he wasn't hardworking either. He started receiving the most basic warrior training from his father when he was 8 years old, and he entered the Knights Academy when he was 11 years old. When he was 14 years old, he was tested as a mage. After 6 years, he barely reached the level of a level 3 warrior. During his time in the Knights Academy, Leo was regarded as an embroidered pillow by everyone. This caused him to be ridiculed and humiliated in the academy. It wasn't until he was tested as a mage that he felt proud and elated. The reason why the Knight of Eric sent him to the Mages Academy was because he was disappointed with his performance in the Knights Academy. After becoming a mage apprentice, Feng Chou completely gave up on the warrior's training, and his level dropped from level 3 to level 2. In the past, Leo didn't want to recall this experience in Fergusac, but today, he didn't know why, but this unbearable memory flowed into Feng Chou's heart uncontrollably. In the past, Leo was spoiled, so he couldn't feel the incomparably deep fatherly love that Eric had for him. However, as an orphan, Feng Chou could feel it. When he recalled these memories, he felt the incomparably forgiving love that the Knight of Eric had for Leo. Although Leo disappointed Eric time and time again, he forgave him time and time again. No, he never even blamed him. He just silently used his own shoulders to create better conditions for Leo. He would rather live in a simple defense tower, and he would rather fight like a mercenary in the mud of the forest every day to create the best conditions for Leo. However, Leo always felt that all of this was natural. At this moment, Feng Chou was once again blinded by tears. He couldn't even tell if these were his own tears of fatherly love, or Leo's tears of guilt. At this moment, he felt that he hated the old Leo, but he couldn't tell if this was his own disgust for an unfilial son, or Leo's regret for his past. Feng Chou, who suddenly realized that his mind had wandered, hurriedly wiped away his tears. He once again pulled himself together and observed every single person that entered and exited the town's south gate. He did not completely trust Simon. Although he felt that whether it was from the perspective of reason or benefits, Simon had no need to betray him. He felt that for the sake of his little life, he still had to be a little more careful. Soon, Feng Chou gave up because there were too many people going in and out of the south gate. He couldn't keep an eye on all of them. There were 5,000 to 6,000 people living in this town. Most of them were not farmers. There were dozens of shops and workshops in this city. Among them, there were 4 or 5 blacksmiths. The town supplied more than a dozen knights and even more knights and gentlemen nearby with weapons, farming tools, clothes, groceries, and other goods. The food, wood, herbs, furs, and other goods produced in Forgesak's territory also had to be transported out through this town. Therefore, this town was quite prosperous. There were people going in and out of the south gate almost every moment. Feng Chou could only leave the task of observing and analyzing the flow of people to Qiankun Pagoda. Qiankun Pagoda's scanning range was less than 30 meters, but if Feng Chou agreed, Qiankun Pagoda could use his eyes or other senses to observe things further away. Moreover, Qiankun Pagoda could record everything his eyes captured and analyze. This way, it was equivalent to infinitely magnifying the observation ability of his eyes. What he needed to do was to keep his eyes on the direction of the city gate. Most of the people going in and out of the city gate were carrying weapons. Quite a few of them were wearing armor. Even if these people were not mercenaries, mercenaries still made up a large proportion of them. Even boats on the water needed the protection of mercenaries. This was because there were many fishermen bandits on the river. There was a branch of the mercenary guild in this town. They issued missions for the nobles and merchants, and also guaranteed the mercenaries a reward. About an hour later, Simon sat in a carriage and drove over. He did not sit in the carriage, but sat beside the coachman. During this time, Qiankun Pagoda did not observe any suspicious people. When Simon's carriage entered the courtyard of the inn, Qiankun Pagoda confirmed that there was nothing fishy in the carriage. Feng Chou then returned to the room Simon had booked for him on the second floor. When Simon was paying the bill, the innkeeper followed Feng Chou's request and said that the second room Simon booked was for the wine. This was because if he followed Feng Chou's request, Feng Chou would agree to pay more for the wine. Simon naturally did not care about this little bit of wine money. He threw down a few crowns and redeemed his scimitar. He also brought a chest with him to store all the weapons and armor he had brought out from the underground. Sitting in the carriage Simon brought, Feng Chou once again entered this strange yet familiar town. Inside the city gate was a narrow street paved with stone slabs. On both sides of the street were low houses. As the carriage moved forward, the houses on both sides of the street gradually became tall and orderly. Some small taverns, bakeries, and grocery stores began to appear on both sides of the road. The closer the carriage got to the center of the town, the more crowded the shops on both sides of the street were. The shops looked more spacious and bright, and there were more pedestrians on the street. In the center of the town was the Lord's Castle. It was a huge fortress with a side length of nearly 150 meters. Outside the castle was a moat, and outside the moat was a wide circle of streets. This circular street called the Lord's Avenue was the most prosperous part of the city. Outside the main entrance of the castle was a wide square. Opposite the square was the temple of the god of nobles and knights. Facing the main entrance of the castle, to the left of the temple was the Knights' Academy, and to the right was the temple's affiliated hospital. These three buildings added together were just as wide as the front of the castle. The castle road also included the temple complex. Passing through the back of the temple, Feng Chou's carriage entered the Lord's Avenue from the back of the temple. On one side of the street were bustling shops, and on the other side was the tall back wall of the temple. The Knights' Academy had a back door in this direction. Feng Chou was most familiar with this part of the Lord's Avenue. When he was studying at the Knights' Academy, he was a frequent visitor here. For example, the cafe called Cat and Coffee. It served tea from the Elven Kingdom and coffee from the southern continent. The carriage turned the corner and came to the east side of the street that went north and south. Between the castle and the temple was a square that was 200 meters long and 100 meters wide. The ground of the square was covered with smooth stone slabs. In the center of the square was a beautiful fountain. The carriage drove through the east side of the street without stopping and came to the back of the castle. In this direction, there was a particularly famous shop, the All Secret Arts Shop. It was said that this chain of secret arts shops in Antalya County was opened by the family of the Counts of Antalya. This shop bought alchemy products from the teachers of the Antalya Mages Academy and sold them for a profit. Feng Chou also heard that the headmaster of the Antalya Mages Academy also had shares in this shop. These were all rumors that Leo had heard in the Mages Academy. The all secret arts shop occupied an area of its own. On both sides and behind the shop was a garden that belonged to the shop, surrounding the shop in the middle. Above the entrance of the secret arts shop, there was a string of letters formed by flowing white smoke. When combined, it was the words All Secret Arts Shop. This was the effect of an illusion. The carriage went around the main road behind the castle and stopped in front of a large shop at the corner. Report, select text and click report to let us know about any bad translation. Arcane Universe Chapter 39. After Simon brought Feng Chou out of the car, they walked into a small alley at the side of the shop and entered the back of the shop through a side door. In a lounge behind the shop, Feng Chou and Simon met the shop's guard captain. This guard captain named Ryle was a huge man close to 2 meters tall. His face was rough, and his eyes were bright and full of expression. Qiankun Pagoda told Feng Chou that this was a powerful warrior of the 8th rank. Simon and Ryle were obviously old acquaintances. From their conversation, Feng Chou could tell that he and Simon would be following a caravan to Antalya City tomorrow. Even though there was a waterway from Fejisak to Antalya City, the Fejisak River flowed faster. Going down with the current was of course enjoyable, but going against the current was more difficult. It required a tracker to pull the boat up bit by bit. Therefore, the boats going against the current were not only slow, but also light. In order to make up for the lack of water transportation, the land transportation from Fejisak to Antalya was also very prosperous. After chatting for a while, Ryle had people help Simon and Feng Chou settle down in the shop. After settling down, the first thing Feng Chou and Simon did was take a bath. The two of them had stayed in the underground world for more than half a year and hadn't taken a bath at all. The smell on their bodies was simply indescribable. After spending more than 2 hours and changing the water 3 times, Feng Chou finally washed himself clean. He changed into the clean linen underwear that Ryle had people prepare for them, put on his inlaid leather armor, and tied up his clean hair. Finally, he returned to his original appearance. When Feng Chou saw his true appearance in the mirror for the first time, he couldn't help but be a little dazed. In the mirror, he had a tall and straight figure that was fit but not too muscular. He had a handsome face with clear edges and corners, eyes as blue as the sea, and a head of reddish gold hair. These characteristics combined to form a handsome, proud, and somewhat rebellious young man. Feng Chou, who had been ugly for 20 years, was suddenly struck by happiness. He suddenly felt that all the hardships he had suffered were worth it. When Feng Chou walked out of the house, Simon happened to walk out at the same time. Seeing him, Simon couldn't help but gawk for a moment, before saying respectfully, "Young Master Leo, you truly deserve to have the noble bloodline of the Stewart family." Feng Chou shrugged and said, "Come on, Simon, I'm a famous embroidered pillow in Fergisac." Simon said, "Those who think so must be blind. How can an embroidered pillow escape from Drow's underground city?" Feng Chou smiled and said, "Mr. Simon, are you sure you're not praising yourself?" Simon shrugged and said, "Of course, you can also think of it that way. Well, what I want to say is that you are not suitable to walk on the streets like this. If I were a woman, as long as I see your face, I will never forget it. You will definitely be recognized." Feng Chou thought for a moment and said, "That is possible. But," Simon said, "do you have to go out for a walk?" Feng Chou said, "That's not it. I just want to change my inlaid leather armor to a set of medium-sized armor. This pair of scimitars to a knight's shield and a one-handed sword. You know, I have received orthodox knight training. I am not proficient in dual-wielding abilities, nor am I proficient in light armor." Simon said, "That's not a problem. Leave it to me. Do you have any other requests?" Feng Chou said, "You know, as a decent person, I need a few decent clothes. For example, a few pieces of silk underwear, a few pieces of silk formal wear, a few pieces of hunting clothes, a few pieces of battle robes that can be worn over the armor." Simon said, Oh, no problem. That night, Simon delivered what he wanted. After changing into the new clothes, Feng Chou strolled in the backyard of the shop. He found that there was a large amount of food piled up in the warehouses around the backyard. Seeing the food, Feng Chou suddenly remembered the days when he ate bear goblin in the underground city. He took a few bags of wheat and put them into the Qiankun Pagoda. After taking a few bags of wheat, Feng Chou thought that if he was forced to hide in the heaven and earth pagoda in the future, it would be difficult to survive with only wheat. As a precaution, he took advantage of the fact that there was no one in the kitchen and slipped in. He took some ingredients and various condiments into the heaven and earth pagoda. Early the next morning, Feng Chou changed into his new armor. It was a fitted medium-sized black steel battle armor with black steel battle boots, black steel gloves, and a beautiful white battle robe with blue embroidery on the outside. It made him look even more handsome, and it made the staff and guards of the caravan who were preparing to set off look at him. Feng Chou's caravan had a total of 7 carriages. These carriages were quite large and were all four-wheeled carriages. As an engineering student, Feng Chou curiously observed the structure of these carriages. The chassis of these carriages were formed by 2 sets of wheels in the front and back and a connecting shaft in the middle. The entire chassis formed a complicated steering mechanism. As an excellent engineering student, Feng Chou could easily understand that these mechanisms allowed these four-wheeled carriages to turn freely. The heavy steel chassis, shock-absorbing steel plates, and steel carriage frame allowed these carriages to carry a considerable amount of weight. According to Qiankun Pagoda's scan, the weight of goods on each carriage exceeded 2 tons. The horse pulling the carriages was also a giant horse that Feng Chou had never seen before. Its back was even more than 2 meters tall. However, this was not what surprised Feng Chou the most. What surprised him the most was that the 4 wheels of the carriage were wrapped in a layer of black substance. Feng Chou pinched it with his hand. It felt very much like rubber. Leo's memory told Feng Chou that this black substance was called black glue. It was a basic alchemy product that could be produced by an apprentice mage with the help of alchemy equipment. In Leo's memory, magic and alchemy had already penetrated into every aspect of this world. From the construction of castles to the production of ordinary goods, everything could be improved by magic. And all of this began in the Arcane Empire. This caravan was mainly transporting crude copper ingots, magic wood, and some herbs. The Furgisak family had a copper mine with good quality upstream of the Elvis River. Coincidentally, there was a black stone mine nearby. The black stone of this world was roughly equivalent to the coal of Earth, but there were also some differences. The Furgisak family had built a copper smelting factory somewhere between the copper and black stone mines. The nobles of the Avondale Empire did not have the right to mint coins. This right belonged to the central bank of the empire. If the nobles wished to mint their precious metals into currency, they could only bring them to the various mints of the empire. The Furgisak family would directly sell the copper ingots to merchants, who would then send them to the Vita Duchy's mints to be converted into currency. In terms of herbs, there were ordinary herbs as well as some basic alchemy herbs. In the wild forests, there were large amounts of herbs. Many lords liked to hire mercenaries to sweep through the forests outside their territory and organize militia to collect herbs. The profits from alchemy herbs were considerable. Report select text and click report to let us know about any bad translation. Arcane Universe Chapter 40. The next morning, before the sun had even risen, the caravan had already set out in the cool morning breeze. Ryle had prepared a warhorse for Simon and Feng Chou. The caravan exited from the west gate of Furgisak, crossed a field, and entered the forest under the illumination of the morning sun. The forest here was a typical temperate broadleaved forest. The trees were dense, and the roadside was covered with a thick layer of fallen leaves. The road in front of them was far better than the one Feng Chou and the others had taken yesterday. Not only was the road wide, but it was also arched. There was a drainage ditch on the roadside, and the road was paved with a layer of stone. It wasn't hard to see that the construction of this road should have involved the participation of magic. Feng Chou sat comfortably on the horse, his body swaying gently as the horse walked, as if his body had become a part of the horse's body. Feng Chou actually didn't know how to ride a horse. but this body of his had received night patrols since young, so his riding skills were quite good. It had even become an instinct of his body. When he touched a horse, he didn't need to think at all. This body instinctively knew what to do. Feng Chou sat comfortably on the horse, pressing the reins under his buttocks. He only relied on his legs to control the horse, and played with a heavy gold coin in his hand. Last night, Simon had helped him sell Drow's leather armor. That set of Drow's leather armor came from a high-grade Drow warrior. It was a set of +4 magic armor. When buying weapons and armor, Simon discovered that in Furjasak, the best magic weapons and armor were only +3. The difference between +3 and +4 magic items was more than double. In the end, Simon only sold the body armor, leg armor, boots, and helmet of the armor, leaving the gloves and a pair of scimitars. He used the proceeds of the sale to buy Feng Chou a set of +3 medium armor, +3 shield and one-handed sword, as well as the most expensive clothes in Furjasak. Even so, Simon gave Feng Chou a purse to compensate for the difference. In addition to about 70 to 80 gold coins, there were also a lot of small change of various denominations. This was the pocket money that Simon had exchanged for Feng Chou. Feng Chou looked at the beautiful gold coin in his hand and couldn't help but sigh. The craftsmanship of this world was no worse than that of Earth. It was a gold coin with a face value of 10 crowns. It weighed a little more than 10 grams and was slightly larger than a 50-cent copper coin. This kind of gold coin with 95% gold content had a beautiful golden red color. It was said that it was because rare metals such as arcanite copper were mixed into it. The mixing of these metals made the gold coin very tough and resistant to wear. There was a zigzag pattern around the gold coin. This was to prevent people from stealing the gold on the gold coin by filing it. On the front of the coin was a sculpture of a sitting lion. The lion was the symbol of the royal family of Avendel. The lion was surrounded by a circle of thorns. Around the thorns was a circle of letters. The upper half of the letters meant Royal Bank of Avendel and the lower half was the face value of the coin, 10 crowns. The reverse side of the coin was engraved with a man's profile. Around the portrait was a circle of letters that read, Emperor of Avendale, Olaf IV. This was the current emperor of the Avendale Empire. The sculpture was very clear and the lines were very detailed. The craftsmanship was actually not inferior to the modern coins on Earth. According to Leo's knowledge, this coin was produced by a type of alchemy equipment that was powered by magic. The alchemist who invented this equipment was generously rewarded by the goddess of commerce. Other than the 10 crowns gold coin, the Royal Bank also issued a 20 crowns gold coin that weighed a little more than 20 grams and also contained 95% gold. Because of the lion sculpture on the coin, people liked to call the 10 crowns gold coin a small golden lion and the 20 grams gold coin a large golden lion. Other than the 1 crown silver coin, there was also a 50 PS silver coin. It weighed a little more than 10 grams and was slightly larger than the $1 silver coin. The PS was the denomination of copper coins. The exchange rate between the coins and crowns was 1 crown for 100 PS. There were 4 denominations of copper coins, 1 PS, 2 PS, 5 PS, and 10 PS. The 1 PS coin was slightly larger than the 50 cents coin. It weighed 5 grams and was made of brass. People called the smallest denomination copper coins. The 2 PS weighed 10 grams and was slightly larger than the $1 coin. People used copper coins to refer to these coins, weighing 15 grams for 5 pence. This copper coin contained about 4% silver. The 10 PS coin also weighed 15 grams and contained 10% silver. Long journeys were always boring, especially when one's mode of transportation was horses. Bored, Feng Chou used the Qiankun Pagoda to scan all the members of the caravan. The caravan had a total of 7 carriages, a leader, 2 guards, 7 assistants, 7 coachmen, and 18 mercenaries. This group of people were all professions, without exception. Even the coachmen and assistants were level 2 or 3 warriors. To Feng Chou's surprise, in the caravan, the person with the highest profession level was the leader of the caravan. This middle-aged man was a level 7 warrior and a level 4 rogue. His 2 guards were a level 5 warrior and a level 6 warrior. These 2 guards also had the profession of rogue. The more than 10 mercenaries seemed to belong to the same mercenary group. Mercenary groups that could accept escort missions were those with relatively high credibility levels in the mercenary union. The mercenary union divided the credibility of mercenaries into 10 levels, and each level had different privileges. For example, mercenaries with a credibility level of level 3 or above could buy potions and alchemy items at different discounts in the mercenary union's internal shops. It was said that as long as a mercenary reached level 5, they would be able to receive a monthly pension from the Mercenary Association when they were old or disabled. It wasn't much, but it was enough for a person to live on. The higher the credit rating, the higher the pension. At the same time, level 5 was also the threshold for mercenary groups to accept escort and guard missions. The credibility level of a mercenary group depended on the average credibility level of the main members of the mercenary group. The credibility level not only determined the types of missions a mercenary group could accept, but also determined the upper limit of a mercenary group. The lower the credibility level, the lower the upper limit of a mercenary group. More than a third of this mercenary group were level 5 professions and above. Among them, the leader was a level 7 warrior and a level 3 rogue. His 2 assistants were a level 6 rogue and a level 6 warrior. Below them were 2 level 5 warriors and a level 5 rogue. The rest of the mercenaries below level 5 were mostly level 4 warriors or rogues. Those higher level warriors and rogues more or less had a profession level of a part-time profession. A few level 3 warriors in the mercenary group looked very young, and they all carried heavy crossbows or guns. Yes, guns. Gunpowder weapons existed in this world. In fact, almost everyone in this caravan carried more than one gun. Their guns were very similar to the flintlocks on Earth, but strangely, there was no flint. From Leo's memory, this was probably a kind of gun that was powered by magic. Leo was not familiar with this kind of weapon. In his impression, the power of this weapon was similar to a crossbow, and it took a long time to reload. Only idiots and cowards would use it. His father had equipped some of the militia in the territory with the simplest guns. Judging from the familiarity of the mercenaries and the caravan members, this mercenary group and the caravan should have a long-term cooperative relationship. Report. Select text and click report to let us know about any bad translation.